Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. My name is Michael Sears. I'm the sales development rep for the Americas at Backlight. We're really glad that you took the time out to give FTrack another spin. It's been a really trying year for our industry, and we're very pleased to help studios get the tools they need to be successful in 2024, which is just about upon us. A big part of managing the way new work lands is production management, and FTrack Studio is a tool that will help you do just that. It was built by visual effects professionals for visual effects professionals, and I hope that's noticeable to you as we dive into creating custom workflow schemas today, which are essentially the template or templates you set up for your projects in FTrack. That can be VFX based, but can also be changed to adapt to other workflows. The bulk of this webinar will be shown by Kyla Laban, who's our solutions consultant based in Montreal. This session is a part of our paid training that we offer studios for onboarding, but now we wanted to bring it to you in this format so more of you can benefit from it all at the same time. We will expand on this in future sessions and office hours that are scheduled next. We do expect the webinar to take about the full hour. During the entire time, there is a chat window, so use it as a Q&A panel at any time throughout. Ask us some questions. After the presentation performance, we'll have time to go through questions live as best as we can. If we don't get to it during the time allotted today, we will certainly follow up with email afterwards. And that's what we have to say. So let's begin. Over to you, Kyla.
Perfect. Thank you, Michael. And thanks, everyone, for joining us today. I'm going to get a screen share going, and we will dive right in. One here. There we are. All right. And before we dive into the training, I will mention, of course, this is the first time that we are presenting this content in a webinar format. And as such, we're actually going to be sending out some attendee surveys afterwards. We'd like to hear what you think about the format. Does it work in this webinar setting? Do you have any feedback, any suggestions on how we can make it more comprehensive? Or maybe it's great, everything works. So we'd love to hear from you so that as we continue to present more of these in the future, we can ensure that everybody is getting everything that they need out of these sessions. So please keep an eye out for that. All right, so to dive in, as Michael already mentioned in today's session, we are going to be going through how to set up your own custom workflow schema. So of course, when we're talking about a workflow, what we're talking about is the sequence of events that needs to happen for you to complete your project on spec and on time. And when we're talking about a workflow schema, specifically within FTrack, that is how you take that entire workflow and map it into the FTrack UI so that you have proper visibility on all of the data that you need to track for your project. So it's more like a project skeleton, your project DNA, so that you know what you need to be keeping track of. And in order to create these schemas, you're going to be able to, those schemas are going to contain a few different things. So they're going to contain objects, tasks, and milestones. And I'll get more into defining what those are in the next slide, so don't worry. And for those object tasks and milestones, you're going to be able to configure types. So these allow you to categorize those things, statuses, so that you can track how things are progressing through your project, and task templates. So those are templates that will allow you to create groupings of tasks and help you to populate your project a little bit more quickly. And I will mention as well, of course, that FTrack does come with a few schemas out of the box. But what we're going to be going over today is if you're looking at those schemas and you're thinking, this isn't exactly what I need for the projects that I'm working on, I need something a little bit different. This is to help you go through how you can actually customize that and configure FTrack for your specific project needs. So to go on to some terminology. first up, we've got our object. So in very technical terms, it is a thing. You can see in the examples that that thing, more often than not, is likely going to be a deliverable on your project. So if we're talking about visual effects and animation, more often that's going to be something like an asset build or a shot. It's that object that you're creating to deliver back to your client. However, in terms of actually configuring the FTrack UI, it can also be a way that you want to organize those objects. It can be a bucket of information. An example of something like this might be a sequence. So all of those shots that you're creating and delivering to your client, they belong to a specific sequence, and creating an object that represents that in FTrack will allow you to organize all of those shots in that sequence so that you know where everything is connected into and it's all organized. Up next, we've got tasks, and I think that's pretty straightforward. This is the individual breakdown of work, the actual action items that your team members need to undertake on the project in order to complete it. So things like your rough layout, your anim blocking, your slap comps, whip comps, all of that stuff that needs to be completed. Milestones, if anyone is unfamiliar with using those when you're tracking a project, that is usually a singular significant date that everyone that's collaborating with you on your project needs to be aware of. So this differs from a task where a task may be worked on over a span of time. It generally has a day it needs to start and a day it needs to be completed by. A milestone will indicate a single date. So you can see some examples here, something like a trailer delivery, a temp delivery, your final delivery. And a milestone is a way that allows you to visualize that so that everybody that you're working with on your project can be aware of those significant dates that need to happen. And of course, finally, our schema, as we already outlined, is the combination and collection of all of those different elements together so that you can monitor and track your project properly. It's your project skeleton. So you can see in some of the examples, this can just be named for the industry that you're working in. They could also be project specific as well. If you have projects with different workflows that have different requirements, you can also configure it per project as well. So with that in mind, back to here. So if this is your first time building out a workflow schema or thinking about a workflow in this manner, you might be wondering, well, how do I determine what I need? And there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. So we do recommend that you go ahead and actually maybe map this out outside of FTrack before diving into the workspace, just so you can get a little bit more clarity on how to visualize this. So maybe you have some workflow diagram software at your disposal, or I know that there are some that are available for free online. You can go taking a look for that as well. So maybe you want to kind of draw out a diagram like this, where you can kind of see the flow of tasks and what the order of operations is to actually complete your objects. Or if you want to go a little bit more low tech than that, you can also just map it out and write it out on a piece of paper. So this, of course, is not any kind of 3D workflow, but just as an example, here's maybe a workflow that would be required to complete planning a webinar, as we're doing here. And this also touches on task types or types, which was not included in the terminology slide. So what those types are, as I mentioned earlier, is how you want to categorize your tasks. So in this case, these task types are referring to different departments that are going to be responsible in this particular workflow. So we've got things like marketing, production, post-production, and these bullet points here, they represent the individual breakdown of tasks. So your task types help you categorize your tasks. They can also relate back to the departments that need to be responsible in the work you're doing, like animation, lighting, effects, modeling, and then your tasks are the more granular steps that need to be taken. All right, so after you've mapped all that out, of course, you're probably wondering, what is that going to look like though once I actually get into FTrack? So I'll show you an example of a project that's already been built out, just so you can start thinking about maybe is this a similar way that you'd want to map out one of your projects, and what that might actually look like once you get into the UI. So if you recently spun up a trial with an FTrack workspace, this project might look a little bit familiar to you. This is Napo. It's our example of a 3D animation project. In my particular workspace, it's a little bit more fleshed out than what we have in the trial. But what you can see here in the task spreadsheet, up here, I have this top row that represents the project in its entirety. And nested underneath that, I have a layer of objects. So you can see I have things like folders. So a folder can be an object. I've got some sequences, and then also I've got some milestones down here that were created on the project level. And then nested underneath these objects, I have other objects. So under this folder, I have the individual asset builds that were created, and nested underneath that, I have the different tasks that are linked to that particular object. And it is structured the same way in the sequence here. So underneath that, let me collapse that there. We've got all of our shots listed. We've also got some milestones that were created on the sequence level. And underneath those shots, we've got all the tasks that need to be created. So this is the type of structure that you can then be able to build out once you've configured your workflow schema, which is what we will dive into now. So I actually have a few different tabs open up here. This is just so it's a little bit faster for me to click around and show some examples of what you're doing. You can just stay in one tab if you're going to be following along today. I am going to hop over into a little bit more of a simplified workspace for the exercise. But first off, just to give you an example, so this is the area in the system settings where you can actually create your workflow schemas. And you can see in this workspace, we have quite a long list of these. So you can have multiple workflow schemas in the same workspace. This is going to be a little bit unwieldy to go through in order to demo this and have you follow along. So what I'm going to do is hop over into this one, which is much, much smaller. Now, one thing to mention is that in order to actually build out a workflow schema, you need to have administrator access to FTrack. So from a project here, if you go up to your user icon in the top right corner and click on it, you should see system settings. And if you don't, it means that you are not set up with administrator access. So this is still useful information if you don't have access to this section of FTrack. This is still really fundamental in the way that FTrack is structured and the way it operates. But unfortunately, if you don't have that, you won't be able to follow along immediately right now. However, please feel free to go and spin up your own trial site from our website. This recording will be available afterwards, so you can practice with the recording afterwards as well if you're not able to access this right now, right away. So for everyone who can, please go into your system settings. I've already got mine open on this other tab here. And the area we're going to be focusing on today is this second section from the top here underneath the heading workflow. And you're going to select schemas like I have right here. So you can see that I've got a list of schemas on the side. And in the middle portion of the screen here, as I click on these, you can see this information is changing. So this is all of the information that has been configured for each of these different workflow schemas. So let's go into how we can create a new one now. So we're going to go down to the bottom of this area on the left, and we're going to click the Add button. And we're going to give our workflow a name. So this is, let's just call that webinar and hit create. And you may notice that I have this little warning icon that's popped up. So this is just giving me a heads up that I haven't actually configured my workflow yet. This is not validated to be able to actually start using on a project. So this little icon will just give you a heads up, and it will be there until you've fleshed out all of the portions of the workflow that need to be set up for this to be usable on a project. Now, looking at the information in the center of the screen here, you can see that in this object section, automatically there were tasks and milestones that have been added to the workflow. So at a bare minimum, no matter what you need in your workflow schema, it has to contain tasks and milestones. So if you just want a very, very simplistic project, all you care about is creating tasks for people to track their work, and that's really all you need, you could just configure these sections here and you're good to go. However, for the purposes of the training today, we are going to get a little bit more complex. So if I want to add some more objects into this particular workflow, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the Edit button next to Objects, and you can see that I've got a list of objects that have now popped up that I can select from. So I can just check off whatever I want here and hit Save. And you can see that now those are appearing in this list of objects that belong to this workflow. And I've also got them listed down here. so that I can see what I've actually added and I can configure this information from here. So it's very easy now to go into each object and configure things like your statuses and your types depending on what you need for those particular objects. However, before we get into that, so what if you've opened up this list to add in the objects and you're realizing that an object that I need does not exist in FTrack out of the box. I need something different. You can customize that. So we're going to go through how to customize some of this information before we come back in here and start actually configuring all of the different sections that you can possibly need. So first things first, we will go ahead and customize an object to add into our workflow. So we're going to go back over to the menu on the left-hand side here and click on Objects. So there's the list of objects. You can see this is the same list that appeared when I clicked the Edit button here. And to create a new one, obviously we're going to click this Create button up in the top left corner. We're going to give our object a name. I'm going to call this my Kyla object. I can select an icon. We've got a nice long list that you can choose from so that you have a little bit of a visual reference for it. I'm going to pick cake because who doesn't like cake? All right. And now what you can then configure for the custom objects that you're creating is these attributes. So you can choose whether or not you need to set a priority, whether or not you need to be able to categorize it with a type, and whether or not you need to be able to set a status on it. So for priority, I'll just show you here. Let me go into a specific object. And just a quick segue. So this portion of the FTrack UI, if you're unfamiliar with it, is our sidebar. So anything you click on in your project, if you want to see all the information that's linked to it, all in one place, that's all accessible here in the sidebar. What I'm showing this for is you can see right here that I have the ability to set a priority on this asset build. So if I click into this, you can see that I get a list of different priorities and I can set that information depending on what I want. So is this something that's essential for your workflow? Do you operate with priorities as you're going through your project? You can choose whether or not you want to be able to update that on the object you're creating, and you would just check that off if you do. Up next is type. So do you need to be able to categorize this particular object for any reasons? I'll go back to our asset build to show this as an example. So if I bring your attention to the type column here, you can see that this is an asset build object. However, it is further categorized as a character. And if I wanted to go ahead now and actually add another asset build into this project, let's call this a living room. You can see that I have the ability to select what type of asset build this is going to represent on the project. So a living room is probably not going to be a character. Maybe it's more likely to be an environment that is being used on this project. So you can see now that this living room is now being identified as the type of environment. So if you need a little bit more granularity to track your objects in the UI, you can then go ahead and configure a type on the object that you're selecting. And finally, there's status. Do you want to be able to update an explicit status on your object, or is it good enough for you in your workflow to only be tracking statuses on your tasks? Personally, back in my visual effects days, I always found it very satisfying to be able to finally flip a shot to client approved. So don't deny yourself that joy. Set a status. All right, so I've configured my object and I'm going to hit save. And you can see that I've now got my object in my list here. And the next step that I can do, you might have noticed up here, it says you can drag items to reorder the list. So if I want to set this in a specific hierarchy order, I can just grab my objects and move them around depending on where in this hierarchy I want them to appear. And of course, once you've made any of your adjustments here, always make sure to hit save before you navigate away from the page. Otherwise, those changes won't be committed. For your objects, immediately in the UI, there's no sort of visible changes that will happen. However, something we'll be going over in next week's session is doing imports from a spreadsheet to populate your project. And this hierarchy here will have an impact on those imports. So making sure that this hierarchy accurately reflects what you want this to display as in the UI is important in terms of being able to use that kind of functionality. All right, so that is how you create an object. Of course, create as many custom objects as you need for your workflow. I'm just going to limit it to one in each of these sections, just in the interest of time. So up next, we're going to go ahead and configure types. And again, types are how you want to categorize the tasks that need to be completed on your project. They can be broken out by things like department or other information like that. So we're going to go over to this types area here. And we're getting a little bit into color coding now as well. So same thing as our objects, we're going to go up to create, click the button. We can select a color, so we can color code our object. We're going to give our task a name. And this billable checkbox, this is, do you want your team members to be able to log hours against this task or not? If maybe you're creating some task types that you're just going to be using as a checklist, if you just want to be able to kind of have a record of, you know, did we receive material from something? Did some portion of the project setup get completed? You can uncheck that and just have a task that's going to be used for that purpose without worrying that someone's going to log time to it. But otherwise, you can leave that checked on. And another thing to note, just a little fun tip. Let's say you've got a pretty hefty workflow. There's a lot of different tasks and you're looking at the range of colors here and thinking, but I'm going to run out. What do I do? You may have noticed there's this little code here that appears on the color. This is a hex code. It's one of the ways that websites view color. And you can actually find some websites that will generate these for you, so you can get a wider range of colors if you're interested. So I've actually got an example of one here. It's just htmlcolorcodes.com. So I've got a little color picker here. I can slide around and choose different colors depending on what I want. And you may notice that this value up here at the top, this is changing depending on where I'm sliding this around. So that's my hex value that I want to grab. Ignore all of this over here. So I'm just going to grab that, including the hash. I'm going to copy it. And going back in here, if I paste this in here now, you can see that it's actually updated it to that purple color. So if you need some more colors in your workflow as you're going through these, you can play around with that as well. So I'm going to create my new task type. There it is in my list, and we've got our little warning label again. So this is just letting me know that this particular task type is not being used in a workflow schema yet. You can also see that in this column here. So this is empty, whereas the other task types that I have, they are all listing which workflow schemas they're being used in. So let's say you're auditing your workflow schemas. This is something else. It's a quick visual to help you see if there's maybe anything in your workspace that you're not using anymore. And then up next, and this is actually important to do here, is to actually drag and drop to reorder your task types in terms of what your specific workflow or pipeline order is. So I'm just going to, I'm going to put this over here, let's say, and hit save. And the reason for this actually does have an impact on the UI. So let me grab a shot here to show you. And let me scramble that around. So you can see right now, if we look at the task type column here, that this is not really the order that tasks would flow through an animation or visual effects pipeline. But if I click on the task type column header here, you can see that it has now actually sorted it in the correct order. And that is looking at the order that you have things set in the system settings here. So this is actually an important area to make sure that you've put things in the correct order. And of course, same thing for your task types, create as many as you need. And up next, we're going to go to statuses. So you can see this is very similar to the task types area. We've got our color coding, we've got the used in schema area, so we can see where everything is being used. And there's also this additional column that says correspond to, which I will get to in a moment. What we're going to do now, of course, is the same thing. Hit create. We're going to create our task. We can select whatever color we want. We'll give it a name. And for statuses, you need to make sure that they always map back to what we call in FTrack a state. So there are 4 main states within FTrack. You can see them all here. So there's blocked, not started, in progress, and done. There's a couple of reasons why these exist. So first off, if you're playing around with filters on the project to try and filter down your information and find things, sometimes it's a little bit quicker to filter on a state, which is sort of the umbrella over all of the custom statuses that you're creating, instead of having to add each individual status into a filter that you're using. The other side of this is if you happen to be at a studio that is going to maybe be using our API to do any kind of automations, customization, it might be easier to actually code with a state so that the code doesn't have to be updated every time a brand new custom status is added into your workspace. So blocked as a state refers to anything that people shouldn't be working on. You can see a couple of examples of that back here. So there's on hold and omitted. Obviously, you don't want anybody touching those tasks anymore, so you can set them to blocked. One thing to note for this particular state is there are a couple of areas in the FTrack UI where there are some automations that will actually hide tasks with that state from the UI. So just please make sure that you're being careful when choosing that particular state and that you do actually mean to use it. Otherwise, you might have some tasks that go disappearing accidentally. Not started as any kind of permutation of the task has not been worked on yet. So of course, you're just general not started. Could also be ready to start. So the material is sitting there, but just the artist hasn't picked it up yet. I actually don't have that as a status in my workspace. So I'm going to make this a ready to start status. Up next, we've got in progress. So that's everything from in progress to pending review, revise, anything like that where there has been work that's been completed, but we're not finished with the task yet. And of course, done is any permutation of completed, approved, final that you use. So just make sure that you select the correct state. Once you've done that and you've given it a name and set your color, you can hit create. And you can drag and drop to reorder these as well. So I'm actually going to pull this up here. And what this will do is in the UI here, this will just, let me make this a little bit wider so you can see that properly. This will set what order they appear in the drop-down list right here. And one other thing to note is while you're doing this, even though we're not touching on, we haven't really talked about versions because it's not something that is related to your project structure. You can also at the same time go ahead and make sure that you have all the statuses that you're going to want to apply to your versions. That's the, the reviewables that are being generated from the work that your team is doing. You are going to want to have statuses to apply to those as well. And sometimes those don't actually match the same statuses that you're going to be using for your tasks. So you can create anything that you need for those at the same time. All right, so those are the 3 areas that you can customize. And now let's go back to our schema and start building that out. So back up to this section here. And I'm going to add in that custom object now up here. So I'll click on my objects again, and I've got my new custom object that I can add into my schema, and I'm going to hit save. So that's now added it to my list here. And now for each of my objects, I can just go through a line by line and configure the information that I need to so that I can use these on my project. So first off, we've got our asset build, and this is a type of object where we're going to be configuring a type against it. So I'll just select the statuses that I want and the types that I want. So I'll just do the same as the other asset build we have there. And we'll hit save. And you can see that it lets you know what you've configured just here. We'll go on to sequences. So for this one, this is just asking for statuses. Then I've got my custom object, and this is another one where we'll have types. So you can see that it is the same UI as you go through the objects. Here, I'll just do this quickly so we can move along. Sure. All right, on to shots. And now we'll get into our tasks and our task types. And you'll see here that this UI is a little bit different. So instead of having those 2 columns, we've got this little drop-down menu here where we're going to be selecting the task types that we want to add into our workflow. You might notice this is all in alphabetical order. Don't panic. Everywhere else in the UI, it will pay attention to the sort order that you put in the types area here. So you'll just go through and select off whichever task types you want to add in. I am being a little bit at random here. Please forgive me. All right, so I've got a list of some tasks there. And then we can configure the statuses that we want. There we go. And the reason why this is different is because of this little button down here, the add override. So I'm going to click this, and you can see now in my little tree here, I have this extra section that says override. And what this allows you to do is if you have a specific task type in your workflow that has a different approval process than your other tasks, this will allow you to override the statuses that apply to them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab one of these and drop it into my override section. And you can see that when I click on this task type now, I no longer have any statuses selected. So now I can go through and select the different statuses I want to be able to apply to that particular task type. And if there's another task type that is going to have that same approval process, I can drag that into that section as well. So these two task types will have these specific statuses, and then everything up here will have these specific statuses. And I can add as many overrides as I need. So if I want to go in and add another one down there, I can do that. And let's drop this one over here, like that, and just make it something a little bit different. There we go. So now we've got a couple of different overrides, and we've got all of our task types added into our workflow and all of our statuses configured. And now we can hit save. There we are. And up next, we've got our milestones. And so same thing, back to the old UI here. We've got just that. And for your milestones, it's completely up to your preference and what would work best for your workflow. You could either configure your milestones with the exact same types that you're using for your tasks. If you want to be able to indicate whether a milestone is relevant for a specific department, you can absolutely mirror the same types that you used for your tasks. Or if you want to keep it very, very simplistic, the other option is maybe to choose just one type, something like a deliverable that you want to apply for your milestones. I'm just going to do this, leave it really simple so that you're not watching me click through things in the UI. So let's just set it like that, and we'll go save. And now finally, we've got our versions. So we'll just select the versions we want to be able to apply, the statuses we want to be able to apply to our versions as we're going through our review process. So let's say, there we go. And those are the statuses that we want to apply to our versions. And you may have noticed that as soon as I hit save on that version configuration, that my little warning sign up here next to my workflow schema disappeared. So I know we still have this task template section down here at the bottom that we haven't touched yet, but technically your workflow schema is now done. So you've got all of the different areas that you need to have configured so that you can use this effectively in a project, all set up and ready to go. But we will now go into task templates so you can see if that's something that will help you in your workflow. So just a quick recap. This is all of the information that we just went through. So how to create your objects and your task types and your statuses, how to reorder things so they match your workflow, how to set your overrides. So that's just a quick run through of what we just covered in the UI right now. And then going into task templates. So what task templates will allow you to do is all of those task types that you configured in your workflow schema, it allows you to group them together in different configurations so that when you're creating an object on your project, you can easily attach all of those different tasks that need to be attached all in one go without having to do it manually one by one by one. So a quick example of this. I'm going to go over to a project in this workspace that I can play around with. Let me just, actually, I've got an example right here. So here is a shot, and if I compare it to something like this, you can see I've got a whole bunch of tasks attached to this particular shot, but this one I don't. I don't have that little drop down. There's nothing here. So if I wanted to, I could go here and I could create each task one by one and attach that there. However, that is a pretty manual process. So what I can do instead with a task template is if I right-click on this shot and go to task templates, you can see I have a list that populates here, and I'll go shot template. And you can see now that I have all of the tasks that I want to be able to track against this shot, just created all in one go. So your task templates allow you to access this functionality instead of having to do everything very, very manually one by one in the UI. So let's go back and create one of these for ourselves here. So down here at the bottom, we're going to go edit. We're going to, on the left-hand side here, click this add button. So there's a template. We'll give it a name and select the task types that we want to include in the template. Let's do that and hit apply. You can see that that's updated the naming of the template on the side here, so that's now saved. And I can create as many of these as I need in the same workflow schema. So if I want to create a shot template now, I can do that. And there we go, and apply. There's my shot template, so I can switch between the two of those. And maybe I want to create an asset build one as well. And apply. There we go. So now I've got a few different templates created on my project. They've all been applied. I can hit close, and I've got them all listed down here in the task template area. So if you've been following along today, congratulations. You've just built out your first custom workflow schema. Now let's quickly go through some best practices. So I know that I just made everybody do this manually, step by step. However, if you can start with a clone of an existing workflow schema, this will help to give you a leg up. So what I mean by that, let's hop back over here, is let's use an example of, say, this workflow. Oh, what just happened? Okay, sorry, I thought I stopped sharing my screen for a moment there. So here we are. Let's go back to just the standard VFX workflow schema that comes out of the box with FTrack. So let's say I was looking at this and I said, you know what, this is really close to what I need, but it's not quite right. I need to make some changes. Instead of trying to recreate it from scratch, what I could do is down here at the bottom of the screen, there is this clone button, and I can click that. And it will fail to clone the schema. So let's try something else. Let's go to my webinar one. All right, we will hit clone. And you can see up here in alphabetical order, I've now got copy of webinar. And this is identical to this at this moment, but I can hit rename workflow. And this is new webinar now, and rename it. And now I can actually go through and add and remove whatever information from here to build on top of it. So it does save you a little bit of time when it comes to building a workflow schema. Another great use case for this would be, let's say you have created a standard template to use at your studio, but you have one particular project that has a little bit of a different workflow. This will allow you to take that template that you're using in your studio, clone it, and adjust it for that specific one-off project instead of having to go ahead and recreate the entire workflow schema from scratch. So that's something useful that you can take advantage of there. Up next, of course, I know I said create as many objects as you want, create as many task types as you want. We do recommend, however, to try and start simple and build as you start using it. It can get really, really tempting to kind of go all out and build this really complex, flashy workflow schema, but it could end up that you just have created something that's a little bit too bloated to use. So try to streamline it, start with just the essentials that you know that you need, start testing it out on some projects. And it's always super simple to just go in and add some additional objects or task types or statuses as you need after the fact. And this is because it's much, much easier to add to the workflow than to remove things after the fact, which goes into point number 3, which is don't remove things from your workflow schema after you've started using them on projects. One, this can be confusing for your team members if all of a sudden things are going missing. And in some cases, it might actually mean that you've got some manual work that you have to do, like potentially going into those projects and removing, updating objects and tasks that have a specific status applied to them before you can actually get rid of that status completely. So just something to keep in mind in terms of making life easier for you. And finally, we do recommend that you audit your workflow schemas periodically, maybe once a year, twice a year, depending on what you think is useful in your case, just to make sure that it is still fitting all of your project requirements. And again, since we did point out that little warning that pops up for things like your statuses and your types, if you happen to have something that's not being used at all in a schema, just gives you a little bit of an opportunity to do a clean sweep and make sure that your lists of objects and things are not getting too long and unwieldy. All right, so let's go and create a couple of things quickly on a project using our new workflow. I know we're getting close to time, so we'll just go through this very quickly, how to create a project and how to create a couple objects and apply some task templates. So I'm going to go back over here. I'm going to click on projects in the top menu here and click create new project. And this will bring up this menu here where I can give my project a name, a code, and I'm going to apply the workflow that I've just created here. You might have noticed that this VFX one is populating automatically. That is actually because in this workspace, this VFX one is set as the workflow default. I'm not sure how well this is going to appear in a screen share. You might notice there's a little push pin icon that is showing up there. If I want to change which workflow is my default, let me go to the webinar one. You can click this button up here, set as default. And now when I go back to create new project, you can see that the webinar one is now appearing as default there. If you don't want to do that, you can also change it in the drop-down list as well. So let's say this is webinar fun. You'll see the code gets populated automatically. You can change this if you want to. Just be aware that this needs to be accessed by the API as well. So some coding syntax needs to be taken into account. All lowercase, no spaces, no funky characters. Make sure workflow has been selected and set your start and your due dates. Let's ignore private access for now. Don't touch that one. And let's go create project, go to project. And here we are. So I've got my nice empty task spreadsheet and I can go into my create button and you can see there are all the objects that I added to this particular workflow schema and I can now start building things out. So I'll use my custom object here. And you can remember that I was able to configure a type for this type of object, so I can select that from this list here. And if I want to also at the same time apply one of the task templates that I created, I can select those from the list up here. So let's go to that one and hit create. And I've now got my new object in my project with all of my tasks automatically attached to it. So that's how you can start populating everything you need in your task spreadsheet so you can start generating the structure that you need to track your projects. All right. And some quick tips and tricks in the last couple of minutes here. So as I just showed, you can set your workflow schema as the default so that you don't have to manually apply it when you're creating a new project every single time. For the second point, using our import tool. So I'm actually going to not go over this particular topic today. We're going to go into this in more detail next week in setting up a project. But we do have an importer tool, which will allow you. So if you have your entire project structure set up in a spreadsheet, you can take all of that information and import it into FTrack to set up your project. So that's another way that you can do that. That might be a little bit faster for you rather than creating everything manually like we've been doing just now on that example in the project itself. And finally, in addition to using your task templates, you can actually apply them to multiple objects all at the same time. And you can also copy and paste information to quickly populate your projects in the UI. So let me show you how to do that very quickly before we end here. So let me make another object. Let's use a shot this time. And I'm not going to add a task template by default this time. I'm just going to create it there. Oh, I accidentally nested it under this other object. Well, this is okay because this will allow me to show you something that you can do if you make a mistake like I just did now. I don't want this nested under here. That was a mistake. I can move this out of that part of the hierarchy. So I can just grab that and I can now nest it underneath the project. It's going to ask me if I want to move it, and I can click move. And you can see now that it is now on its own row in the hierarchy. So problem solved. All right, so I've got my new shot that I've created. And if I want to make some other shots very quickly, what I can do with hotkeys is I'm going to select my shot. And you can tell that this is the row that you've selected because you've got this little purple line on the row here. And I'm going to hit on my keyboard, so hotkeys only, I'm going to hit Command C. I'm on a Mac. If you're on a PC, it'll be Control C. I'm going to make sure I select the project row this time, so I'm on the right row of my hierarchy here. And I'm going to do Command V or Control V if you're on a PC. And you can see that I've now duplicated that shot. And I can just keep doing that over and over again for however many shots as I need. And the only thing you'll just need to make sure that you do is that you change the shot name before you save anything. So if I hit save right now, you'll see I get an error. It's letting me know that there's an object on the same level that has the same name. So it just won't let you save that information. So I'm just going to go in here and update my shot names very quickly. There we go. And I'll hit save. And so I've got all of my shots. And if I want to now go ahead and apply a task template to all of these at the same time, so I don't have to do it one by one, I'm going to hold down Shift and select all of those shots. So you can see with the purple bar at the side here, I've got all of this selected. I'm going to right click, go down to my task templates and go to shot template or whatever other template applies for your workflow. And you can see that I now have all of my tasks attached to all of those shots all at the same time. So that's another thing to save you a little bit of time in your project setup. And the final tip I'll give before we try to leave some time for some questions is let's say you want to set up a template project. So you're going to have a template project with your project structure set up. You can actually copy that entire structure from a template project into a new project. So I'll show you how you can do that in my other workspace over here. I have this template project. So this is a template for a VFX project. I've got an example of a shot with all the tasks that I want. I've got an asset with the tasks that I want. And one other important thing to note for when you are copy pasting into a new project is you need to make sure that both of the projects are using the exact same workflow schema. So this project template was created with the VFX workflow schema. So to paste it, I need to make sure that the new project I'm pasting into was also created with the VFX workflow schema. So I'm going to grab everything here except for this top project row, holding down Shift. So I've got all of my objects and my tasks selected here. Again, with hotkeys, I'm going to do Command C or Control. And I'm going to create a new project now. Create new project. I'm going to make sure I have the VFX workflow populated, since that is the workflow that was applied to this particular project. Hopefully that is a name I'm not using already in this workflow, in this workspace. Let me just adjust my end dates a little bit. There we go. I'm going to create my project and go to my project. And what I can do now is highlight my project row and do Command V or Control V. And you can see I have that entire structure from my template project pasted over here. So those are a couple of tips to help you go ahead and populate your projects a little bit more quickly that you can implement. All right. And last but not least, yes, there is homework. So first up, you are going to set up, if you weren't able to follow along today, Please go ahead and with the recording, try and set up your first workflow schema. If you have been following along, just continue to build that out yourself. And then test it on a project, create a new project, create some objects and some tasks on it, use some of those task templates if you're going to set those up as well, and just see how that's working out for you. And of course, if you are having any struggles, if you have any questions, if you've built something out and you just want a second opinion on what you've created, please bring all of that to our office hours on Thursday, and we're happy to help you with all that stuff. And that is everything for today.
Thanks for all the thanks, and have a pleasant day. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.